Hello from the dung heap, everybody. These are my friends. A lot of
Hi,
them.
friends.
There he is. Hi, sweetie.
Hello. Good morning, everybody.
And we're live. Hello. SPTV. Hello, and we are live. Hello, lovely ladies.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, welcome, and welcome everyone in the chat. Here we are. I've been looking forward to this for at least a week, I think. We were talking about it. And we have a panel here of, I'm calling them the experts of SPTV when it comes to law and justice and I won't say the American way, the mental health way. So thank you so much for being here. So I want to go around the Hollywood squares here. And we've got, I want to make sure I get, there we go. We have Carrie J. Thank you so much for being here. Carrie J. Esquire.
You can.
Okay. Hello. I thought we could just introduce ourselves and talk about,
me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Hi, I'm Carrie J. I'm an attorney in Pennsylvania. I have been a licensed attorney in Pennsylvania for over 20 years, primarily with my experience in criminal law and more recently the last decade in specifically child welfare, child abuse, child neglect, things like that. I found SPTV at the beginning of the year and just really, attached to the cause and kind of slowly started becoming more active. So I'm glad to contribute in any way that I can.
Oh, welcome. So glad you're here. You've been an asset to this community, and it's been great to get to know you. So, and we have down below, we have Lori Plays. Hello.
Hello.
And if anyone's living under a rock and don't know who you are, maybe you could introduce yourself.
It wouldn't take that big of a rock. I'm Lori, and I'm a retired cop. I was a sheriff's deputy for 24 years in the state of Florida in Tampa. And part of my assignments there were community policing, DUI investigations. What else did? This is very relevant to the topic, actually. I was a member of the sheriff's office CRIT team. Team is like not necessary. It's basically crisis response intervention team. So we had additional trainings to go out and evaluate folks who were having some kind of mental crisis, because in Florida we have a thing called Baker Act, where we can mandatorily hold someone for up to 72 hours for mental health evaluation. And we were provided that additional training to help us evaluate people more efficiently and effectively for those who needed that kind of intervention and those who didn't necessarily need the mandatory evaluation. So I did have that. I did have that little bit of a bleed over into our friend Gretchen's field. Little bit.
Yeah. So we've got Carrie J, who has a lot of experience with child advocacy. Mm-hmm. And then you, Lori, had some experience with not only law enforcement, but the mental health piece. And then we have Dr. Gretchen, Gretchen Only. Hi. Welcome.
First, I appreciate, thank you. I appreciate you putting this panel together. I think it's really important, the topic, albeit, as I said, heavy stuff. I know that there are a lot of heavy topics covered on SPTV, but I think very timely and very important to talk about it, and really appreciate all the various perspectives we have today, because, I don't think some of these topics can be just compartmentalized to one area. It encompasses many different, you know, facets of intervention. But so I am a clinical licensed psychologist in California, Southern California in particular. So I'm in that Orange County area, so in between San Diego and LA. I've been out here, got my training out here, and have worked in various settings. I've worked with kids all the way up to older adults, outpatient programs. I'm currently in private practice, but worked with homeless folks, more community mental health, worked in acute psychiatric hospitals, substance abuse, done a lot of group therapy. Individual is where I'm doing it now, individual adult psychotherapy. So really seeing a lot of different facets of mental health and how different, right, environmental things can impact mental health. But so yeah, I'm just really interested to see kind of, you know, what concerns come up today and what we talk about, because yeah, I've obviously had dealt with a lot of trauma, a lot of different issues across the lifespan of the impact of things like sexual harassment, SA, and trauma. So yeah, I'd like to, and I want to hear from our Lori and Carrie too, and see what happens.
Yeah.
And you, of course, Marilyn.
Well, I'm just facilitating, I guess. I'll put whatever input I can at some point, but I feel like I do have a little bit of a, outreach or in-reach or something of the community, because I have had quite a few community members reach out to me, and I didn't really know what to do, so I reached out to all you ladies, and I really appreciate you being here. There's one specific topic that I had in mind to talk about, and then there's a few other more general and even time. Yeah, I'd hate to say timely, but things move fast in this community, But I feel like we do need to slow down a little bit and deal with this issue that we had come to our attention week and a half, 2 weeks ago, regarding allegations against Louis Repetto. He is a second gen and had a channel. He is a former Sea Org member, I believe, and he was talking not only to quite a few creators, mostly female, some non-binary, and I've heard maybe even a man or two. Also, people in the community, in the chats, in Facebook, on Instagram. And in some cases, he was showing some predatory behavior, maybe some grooming type behavior, and also very disturbingly sending pictures, illicit pictures that were not solicited. And I reached out to all of you because I don't know the legality, the crossing, the lines of internet versus state laws versus what are the recourses, in what cases should the victims be letting filing reports. Where do they go to file the reports? What if the police don't listen to them? What do they do? How do they navigate? So many questions. How do they navigate the justice system? How do they deal with the feelings that they have inside? Some of them not knowing that they were victimized. Some of them not knowing what to think, or even in some cases feeling like they did something wrong. So I wanted to just kind of give you an overview of what I've seen and heard in the community, and we can break it down. Please, anyone in the chat, if you have a question or a comment, we've got the fabulous Nancy Alley in the background. She's going to be starring your questions and comments. And please, I want this to be a safe space. Definitely a trigger warning that the mods are putting up, and let's all just come together and talk about it. So if anyone wants to start to speak to any of those pieces that I brought up, it's an open forum.
Lori, do you want to start from the law enforcement perspective?
Sure.
And then I can pick up kind of prosecution perspective.
Sure. First of all, let me tell you what I would do if I were faced in this situation. First off, I would save. I know you don't want them. I would save the photos from the manner in which they were sent, not just screenshot, but save the photos, because sometimes the metadata will transfer. And then beyond that, I would also take screenshots to show the date, time that these were received. If it's text, I would then block. If it's Messenger, Insta, whatever, I would block there, and I would also report that profile to the social media that was hosted on. Then I would contact law enforcement and I would file a report, because when this happens, it's almost never just one person. There's usually a string of victims.
Yeah.
So report it to your local law enforcement agency. When the internet first came out and we started having these cyber crimes, there was a lot of back and forth. People would try to report it to their local agency. The local agencies would say, oh, well, the crime is actually occurring where that person is. You need to report it there. But you're not there, and you might not even know where there is.
Right.
So there were more laws put into place and guidelines. Now you just go to your local law enforcement agency, because the crime is occurring where you are receiving the victimization. Also be aware that some law enforcement agencies, and every state attorney's office that I'm aware of, has what's called a victim's advocate. You can request to speak to the victim's advocate, and they have the ability to guide you or provide you with services or suggest services that you could probably be needing, like mental health counseling, or just to kind of be there to hold your hand. Like, everybody doesn't have a big family. Victims advocates sometimes just sit with you in court, so you're not alone.
Right.
And just sit with you through the process. So ask to speak to your victim's advocate as well, and see what suggestions and help they can provide to you. That's what I would do in that situation. That's what I would suggest as a law enforcement officer. If somebody came to me and said, hey, this is happening to me, I would say, let's take the report, and then these are the steps that I suggest you go through.
Yeah, I thought that was a really good point to save it from where it came from, so that maybe they can track it, and also to report on Instagram or Facebook or whatever, wherever it came from, to report that, and then to go to your local police station, right? And what if they decide they won't take a report? They give you just a case number. This is something that happened this past week to one of the victims. They didn't want to hear. They were just like, oh, we're not taking the report. Here's your case number. That's it.
Well, what's the case number then? Because typically a case number is the report number.
Right.
So were they just gave her
a case number,
incident number, saying that we had this conversation? I would ask to speak to a supervisor at that point. Say, look, I was victimized, and your officer doesn't want to take a report, and I need to have a report taken. Okay. So I would go up that officer's chain of command.
So have her go again, and then maybe ask for a supervisor and a victim's advocate as well.
Well, not every law enforcement agency has a victim's advocate, but I would ask if they have one. You can, if the local law enforcement agency refuses to take a report, you can go directly to the state attorney's office. You can bypass them. It's not an automatic, okay, we'll take your case, but there's another outlet. You can go and have a conversation with an attorney and let them decide if they have the elements of the crime. You've got to have the elements of the crime to take the report and send it forward to the state attorney's office. So I don't know the specifics of the case you're talking about, but I'm going to assume it was very similar to the other ones. So
it was.
I don't know what it could have been. Just a very lazy police officer that they spoke to that day.
Yeah, in some cases, in this case, things were sent to them. Mm-hmm. They didn't necessarily look at them, but they were there to look at. There was other cases where they said, don't send me anything, and it's not just that. Like we talked about earlier backstage, there's other things that have happened. If someone feels like they were being inappropriately solicited or even harassed in some cases, or felt like they were being groomed, felt threatened, felt in any way uncomfortable, is it worth going to the law enforcement just to at least file that? Because I feel like you said, there's so many different cases. And if this is a serial thing, if this is like, oh, we've got, a dozen people that are saying the same thing in different varying extremes, you know what I mean? Is that worth it as well?
Yeah.
Or no?
Yeah, I would let them know that there are, as far as we know, there are X number of victims from this person so far. This is obviously a predator, and I am just one of many victims. And they spread as far as, this city, that city, that city. These are the cities that we know about.
Right.
And this needs to be documented as well, because this guy needs to be addressed by law enforcement ASAP.
Now, do the victims, do they need to have some type of representation? And that's where Carrie J would come in.
I mean, a victim can always bring an attorney in. They'd have to hire that attorney, unless they happen to have a friend, who is an attorney and would go with them. I will say that, and I've been on both sides. I mainly did prosecution for 8 years. I did do a short period of criminal defense. Police tend to get a little less receptive and less open when there's an attorney at the table. So they might feel like having the attorney there is part of kind of like forcing them into something. So I don't know that it would work, except if you've done, like Lori said, you start at the local, you go up the chain there, you're getting nowhere, you go to the state police. In Pennsylvania we have local, and we have state police that have jurisdiction all over PA, or the state, our Commonwealth of Pennsylvania Attorney General's office. If you're going up these chains and going through these processes and you're not getting anywhere, then yeah, bring in that lawyer and say, look, I would, if it were me and somebody brought me in after they had exhausted all their opportunities, I would say, look, we can't force you to file charges. That's not what this is about.
Right.
We're asking you to document this incident. Please do so, and
Right. Yeah.
hopefully it's a little bit more of an oomph, because I don't know what basis they would have for refusing to even document the report of someone who believes they had been victimized. It makes no sense. It doesn't, writing a report does not translate into filing charges automatically. So.
Gotcha. Yeah, that was my line of reasoning as well, is to at least have it on record so that it's one more person that can have come forward to build a case, possibly, right? I'm trying to think, I don't remember the legal term of it, but when during the Danny Masterson trial, they had the
prior bad acts.
That's it. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. They use that in Bill Cosby too. Yeah. On his retrial, they brought in, it's for uncharged criminal conduct. So criminal conduct, bad conduct for which the defendant is not currently on trial. And it exists in a rule of evidence, and it can be permissible, but it can also be problematic. But yeah, this is a perfect example. Even if, someone was only in the early stages of being victimized, we don't know what the prosecutor down the line might want to be able to use. And prosecutors always love to have more evidence rather than less evidence. So, that's the thinking there.
So are you saying that someone who goes and files a report, they don't necessarily have to have a lawyer? They don't have to put up money? Okay.
No.
All right.
No.
Okay.
I would do that only as a last resort,
Gotcha.
Also, when you're the victim of a case that's being prosecuted, you can kind of consider that the state attorney is representing you, because the state attorney is prosecuting your case. So it's
you don't need a defense attorney.
No. And I mean, technically the state is the client. So I don't want anyone to think that a prosecutor is their personal attorney. Victims don't prosecute crimes. They don't prosecute their crime, what they were victims of. We have to have that separation, for our system to function judiciously and with fairness. But good prosecutors know to really bring the victim in to conversations, discussions about plea bargains, and I can talk about that later. And every DA's office I worked in 2 different ones in Pennsylvania, have a victim witness unit. And these are staffed primarily by people with a social work background whose whole job is to kind of be that conduit between the prosecutor and the victim, and get that information out to the victim, because the ADA might be really busy, or hey, do you have restitution? Do you have out-of-pocket costs? We need to get that for the plea offer, whatever it is. So most DA's offices, even the smallest one, because I live in a small county now, and we have a victim witness unit. It's one person, but we still have them.
Right. So in this initial process, even before the person is able to go to law enforcement, bring themselves to it, and they're trying to figure out, am I a victim? Did I do something wrong? I was nice to this person. What's wrong with me? Do I have vibes that would attract somebody like that? These are all things that I've kind of been hearing, whether it's somebody who had come forward publicly or even privately to me. And so I wanted to, just in the outset, talk to Gretchen as well about this whole process of getting it to the surface and being able to report it and be able to navigate this whole thing, not only legally, but emotionally as well. So do you have anything you wanted to share along those lines, Gretchen, Dr. Gretchen?
Sure. And this may be maybe counterintuitive, I don't know, to what Lori and Carrie have said about the need to come forward. My role as a psychologist is kind of different. And in that sense of, for me, the agenda is healing and processing, and not necessarily coming forward and reporting, right? So though I understand that reporting is often is part of that process, I really, when I sit down with someone who's experienced, SA, harassment, some kind of trauma, I try to assess, I will assess where are they at in their, in this experience, how long, all those things, how long ago was it? How long did it go on for, the circumstances of it, the context, and then really seeing where they are. And, part of trauma therapy is empowerment, and that can manifest in a lot of different ways. So it can be, speaking their truth, telling people in their life about it, and that can be really healing. I had someone, actually a male, come to me, and just releasing his story to me, just being able to get it out, was kind of what he said all he needed to, and that's not common, right? But sometimes when people carry things around with them for many years, even decades, as we know, it can be very, very painful and cause a lot of distress. So I don't necessarily have an agenda to push that. I will, ask them if they reported, or if it's now legally and ethically speaking, definitely there are guidelines about mandated reporting on my end with different things. However, with adults, there's not as much, children are a protected group. So there's obviously a lot more rules and regulations about mandated reporting for mental health therapists and psychologists. But if an adult, and of course that varies state to state. So what may apply here in California, you go to another state and they have different reporting requirements. So that's another aspect of another part of trauma therapy is, and just in general, I try to be as transparent as I can with the people I work with. And that's one of the things I cover in the first session. Like, this is, everything we talk about is confidential, but there are these exceptions, and these are the exceptions that happen. And I'm really upfront with them about what's my parameters of what I need to report, and what I need to, for the safety of them, for the safety of, a lot of things. So, that kind of enters into it sometimes with disclosures in therapy. But it is what it is, right?
Right.
So, yeah. So that's part of my work, and I think one of the main things is also we have to think about when you're talking about reporting something to law enforcement or going and getting some kind of testing after like an assault happens, if we're talking about assault per se. Based on people's experience with different institutions of care and law enforcement, that might impact their wanting to seek services or help afterwards.
Right.
And that's unfortunate. And I'm not saying that's always the case, but that can definitely impact certain folks, accessing or even reporting. But that's part of my empowerment to them is like saying, hey, you might have not had a choice before that might have been put onto you,
Right.
harassment or otherwise, but now you have a choice in what you want to decide to do with this. And I think just realizing that can be very powerful and impactful. It's like, you can choose to report it or not. I know a lot of people do feel guilt though, if they don't sometimes. It's like, and that's something to process through too. I never reported that. And I don't know how many other, speaking to Lori's point, I don't know how many other people may have, been victimized, but trying to process through that, not to put 100% of that guilt on them, say, well, that's, you had a choice and that's okay. You don't,
Yeah.
Yes, maybe it could have prevented some, but yet they're not to blame for that person's behavior and that person's conduct. So,
Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up, because I've had guilt myself from things that have happened in my past, and I really wasn't able to. The one time I did try to tell someone, it was just disregarded, and then 8 years later I found out that person that I tried to tell my parents about ended up victimizing his whole neighborhood of children. So I've carried a lot of guilt for that, even though I did try. And then in the past, it took me till I was an adult to even recognize and talk about things that had happened to me. So I totally get that. And yes, we're not pressuring anyone to go to law enforcement, but we want them to know that is an option if they feel like they want to and they can. So
Yes.
Thank you. Do you mind if I go through some, because I already have quite a few starred and I don't want to, pelt you all at the end. So maybe we can go through a couple of the comments and questions, and maybe that'll kind of steer us towards what's important to the community and
Sure.
what their concerns are. Okay. I think we have a little bit for each of you. So Kelly Copter's here. She's loving to see this dream team. Hey, Kelly, we love you. So glad you're here. We also have the amazing Serge Delmar, literally Serge. Yes, still clap. Kids cannot consent to Scientology. Thank you, everyone in this panel, for raising awareness on this issue. Yes, we are going to keep talking about it, raising the volume, as Susie O says, and it's not okay. Kids cannot consent, and victims that are adults that feel like they haven't had a choice and haven't had a voice, that they have that. So that's what we're here. That's why we're here. So Two Sandwiches wants Carrie to know that she sent that they sent an email a couple of weeks ago.
Yes, I saw it today. I apologize. That's an email I created just for my YouTube, so it's not on my regular rotation, but I did see it today. Yes.
All right. I usually don't do that, but since we're all here and like, why not? Why not? We have Nita's Nook 519. Hello there. How can we keep from re-victimizing those people who were victimized, especially through the law enforcement and justice arenas? Anybody want to take that one?
Well, I know that sometimes even just having to be questioned about what happened feels like being re-victimized. So hopefully you get a compassionate person who has an understanding demeanor and doesn't make the victim feel like they did something wrong, because they didn't do anything wrong. And like Gretchen said, the most important thing for each individual in this journey is taking care of themselves. That comes first.
Mhm.
And if that means a report is second or not at all, then that's what it means, because their mental health is more important than anything. But it's kind of unfortunately it's a lot of how personalities go together in how the questioning feels to the victim, because they're going to be questioned by law enforcement when the report is taken. They're going to, if it goes to a trial, they're going to be questioned by both attorneys on the stand, and that can be difficult. So I think for me, what I would always try to gear my victims to is seek professional mental health counseling to help you get perspective on those things, help you regain the strength that sometimes these situations will zap from you, because you do, and it's part of the grooming thing. You're made to feel like you asked for it, that it was, it's something that you wanted, when in fact none of that is the case. So I would honestly say have mental health counseling throughout this process to protect your mind, your spirit, your well-being, because that's going to help give you the focus to get through the rest of the process. I hope that makes sense.
I would add to that. The practice of having a victim be interviewed multiple times ahead of trial is really over. At least in well-developed, sophisticated DA's offices and in those local agencies that get trained by them, because a prosecutor does not want a victim to have given 4 or 5 statements, because no matter how honest and truthful you are, you're never going to tell the story 100% exactly the same way. There's always going to be some slight variation. And that's what a defense attorney is looking for, because they want to take a normal human response to telling the same thing over again and turn it into an inconsistency, which translates to them arguing to the jury the victim is not believable. So good DA's offices have caught on to that and trained their law enforcement in their counties to not do that. Maybe there's an initial statement to, when a reporting officer who then turns it over to a detective, and then they go through the formal statement process that's going to form the basis for any charges. And then after that, just to kind of give a 5-second version of how prosecutions work with victims, if somebody's charged, there will be, within a short period of time, a month, maybe 2 of the arrest date, a probable cause hearing. And this is a very low burden of proof hearing. Every jurisdiction has their own rules on how much hearsay can be used at these hearings, things like that. But that would be the first time that a victim would have to perhaps appear and testify at that probable cause hearing. 9 times out of 10, those hearings are waived. All the victim has to do is show up and sit in the waiting room, and the defense attorney's like, "Is the victim here?" And they're like, "Yeah." And they're like, "All right, well, what are you offering?" And they start working on the plea deal. Mm-hmm. And then it gets waived. After the probable cause hearing, a victim generally is not required to testify again unless the case goes to trial. So, in most cases, resolved by plea agreement, not by jury trial. So, just to give a little bit of an explanation of how that process works and how often a victim might be called upon to retell their story, because it is re-traumatizing, Yeah.
Carrie,
So this question might, go ahead.
Sorry,
if you want to speak
to follow-up question, Carrie, for you on that. One thing that came to mind is, in terms of the mental health side, is who and on what circumstances the person shares their story of trauma. Mm-hmm. And is it possible that a trauma survivor can share their story and give their testimony in court, but not in court? Like they could do like a tape deposition, in other words, and that could stand in the court of law. So that
it depends on
the in front of the jury and all that.
It depends on the jurisdiction, because that triggers the confrontation clause of the Constitution. So because we have that clause in our Bill of Rights, confrontation generally is meant, it's taken literally, like in person. There are exceptions to the live in-person testimony, but those mainly apply to children.
Mhm.
I'm not aware of adult SA, victims that get to do that. I'm not saying that that doesn't exist. States might have their own laws, things might have been developed. I would think at the very least, though, if it's an adult witness, there would have to be some substantial showing of harm that could happen just from being in the same room as the accused when you're on the stand. But
Which
yeah,
is
it does
basically
trigger.
every essay survivor. I mean, I don't mean to laugh about it, but it's like kind of silly, right?
Well,
Because most people, if they're sitting across from their perp, the person that's the perpetrator of the crime, they would say like, yes, it's harmful, or yes, that's. In other words, that's what I'm thinking about the mental health side. Like what if there's a way that the prosecution and the defense could interview the person that is the victim.
If it's a bench trial, meaning the defendant has waived his right to a jury and the defendant agrees to something like that, I mean, that could open the door. But the issue is it's literally written into our Constitution as a right for every criminal defendant. So overcoming a defendant's constitutional right is going to be very challenging. Now, I'll tell you, one of the counties I worked in, my still good friend was head of the child abuse and sex crimes unit. And her unit, she ran that thing so well. She was in concert with her victim witness coordinator. They were in concert with the forensic interviewers that did forensic interviews for children. They had their witnesses, their victims prepared. And that's a good prosecutor's job, is to, in any crime case involving a person. It would be my job to be like, here's what's coming to you. Let me talk to you about this. Let me tell you some of what you might experience. Let's talk about how you would handle it. Let me role play with you for 5 minutes as if I'm the defense attorney, and then we'll talk about it. So the process of preparing for trial also involves preparing the victim for what they're going to go through. Because number one, we're human, we're sympathetic. That's why we're prosecutors. But number two, we don't want our victim falling apart on the stand and not being able to give the evidence we need to get the conviction we want. So good offices will work very hard to prepare, but it's really hard to kind of avoid it, especially with adult victims.
Right. Okay. I have some more questions if you don't mind me putting them up. LA and Toronto Scientology audit. Hi there. Is it okay to not report if it doesn't feel okay, even if it's the choice that one makes? That's really hard. And I think it kind of speaks to what Gretchen said earlier, was that that's not necessarily that is not in therapy and in talking to a victim. That is not the goal of a therapist, to push them to report. Correct?
Right. No, I think it says it doesn't feel okay, even if it's choice that one makes. It
doesn't feel okay.
There is, understandably, there's a lot of mixed emotions on this because, a lot of people can see that, if there's something that happens, to be able to speak truth to it, to report it, and as one would any type of crime. And that's where I think some of the education needs to happen in terms of mental health, excuse me, and reporting of the individual that is victim to it. For instance, I've heard, celebrities came up. I remember watching an interview with Corey Feldman, and he was a victim of SA when he was younger, I think under 18. I believe it was a minor situation, but I'm not sure. And a lot of people would re-victimize by saying, or re-traumatize by saying, why did it take you so long to come out and report? Why did it take you so long to be vocal about it? And so therein lies some kind of ignorance about the process that people go through when they're processing their own trauma. And, first of all, some people never voice it publicly, and you know, I know, albeit some people say, well, that's they some people think that they should, but it's their process and it's their
Right.
story to tell to whom they want to tell.
Mhm.
And that's part of the empowerment. But yeah, that question itself kind of is really hard to stomach, because there's that, it doesn't matter if they reported the next day or they reported 12 years later or
Right.
15 years later.
Yeah,
If
you hear that a
if
lot.
that's where they're at and they
Mhm.
want to at that moment, then that should be respected, you know.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I give Evil Blue Eye a lot of credit for expressing this in the chat. I'm so glad that so many of you feel comfortable talking about this, or at least, you know, want to be able to talk about it. I didn't report because I felt like my 6-year emotional abusive relationship was worse than the grape. You know,
I'm sorry for what you went through, Evil Blue Eye.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
oh,
Day
this
in
is
and
hard.
day out victimization is
Yeah.
the hardest part. I agree with you on that.
And I'll just,
Absolutely.
as a little anecdote, I was the attorney for our county children youth agency when I started my decade in this field. And I had a woman who was in her late 60s come forward and tell me about SA that she experienced as a child from her older brother,
Wow.
who had put himself forward as a kinship care provider for a child that was in our agency's care. And she came forward, and she had never reported it, but she told me about it all those many years later, because she was so afraid that he was
Mm.
trying to get the child in his house so he could do it to that child.
Oh,
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
So, you know, but listen, I was a prosecutor. Yes, I had the drive to get the conviction, and I wanted to put the bad guys away. But even when I was brand new, 20 something prosecutor, I would never have prioritized my case over the mental health and well-being of a victim who wasn't ready.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I just want to throw that out there.
yeah, I'm so glad that you brought that up, because, you know, not to take attention away from, you know, the issue at hand that we're talking about, but I think being in this space and advocating and being a supporters for the victims and the survivors of, and the children of Scientology, the second gens that we've seen in the past, you know, 6 or 8 months or so many come forward and start to ask questions and start to talk about things. And what really, you know, burns my biscuits, because I don't want to swear, is that I've heard people that have been, in my opinion, controlling the narrative for way too long and saying, why now? Why now, Serge? Why now, Kelly? Why now, Nora? Why now, Bianca? Why
Doesn't
not?
matter.
The
Doesn't
important,
matter.
Why
the important
not?
question there is, why not now, Serge?
Yeah.
Why not now, Kelly? Why not now, whomever? Why not? Why not now?
It's a dumb question.
Ridiculous.
And I'll tell you this, having experienced myself sexual harassment in the workplace, when you experience it and you don't know necessarily if anyone else has experienced it, you feel very isolated and alone.
Mhm.
When more people come out, and you'll see this even with the Me Too movement, you know, with a lot of people, with the Harvey Weinstein, whatever it is, when someone speaks out, then there are more people that come out and will speak, because there is a sense of safety. And that's really important when you experience trauma, is it really can shake up your sense of safety and trust. And so who can I trust? Who can I tell? But when there's this sense of empowerment, like, okay, I can feel, I've been maybe thinking about saying something, but now that there's other people, I can feel kind of like there's support. I'm not alone in this.
Yeah, like a
And
validation. And this was, I thought, was a good point from Sophia, aka Mock something. I can never say that. It helps document a pattern and maybe even an escalation in behavior, and not only for law enforcement point, but also just letting you know you're not alone.
Mhm.
This is a pattern with
Right.
this person. It's not something that you brought on,
Yeah.
you know. So I
And
just
very
want to put this.
often when there are multiples like this, for the person who's sitting back thinking, I'm too afraid to come forward, I don't want to put myself out there. If they're aware that there are other people who have suffered the same thing by the same person, it's kind of almost like a group hug, to
Yeah.
Yeah.
basically, where each of these people can be supportive of each other, so you don't feel like you're alone. You feel like you've got somebody on your team all the time.
Right.
So sometimes just knowing that there are others that went through what you went through is enough to give you the strength to, to come forward, or to, because sometimes people are too afraid to even seek mental health counseling.
Mhm.
So anything that gives them strength to move forward in their journey of healing, that's important. And just knowing that you have others that you can kind of love on and hug on through that is sometimes very helpful.
Yeah. Along those lines, Angry Me said, "Thank you for having this discussion. My heart broke when I saw Mandy and Shannon's video." And I believe they were two of the first to come out and talk about their experience and encourage others and be there for other victims. So thank you so much, Mandy and Shannon, for doing that video and for being so open, because it's not easy.
It's not.
So no. I wanted to pop this up from Carrie's channel. Carrie is super smart and super relatable. I absolutely agree.
Oh, wow. Call my mom. Tell her.
Yeah, right. Please
Love that.
that's when
And-
people say nice things about me. I'm like, tell my kids that.
Definite trouble source. That's Erica.
Oh,
She works harder than
cool.
anybody else in Clearwater. She gratefully was there when Carrie came back again, and I was still in Scotland, so I couldn't be there to protest with her.
Yeah,
But,
and there were
Definite
signs
trouble
posts
source was
everywhere.
there, and I was so grateful for that.
I was a little nervous, so I was like, I'm going to do this for half an hour, and then I'm going to go talk to Erica.
well, thank you, Erica, for being so supportive. That's amazing. And I believe Erica is a member of someone's channel, not mine. Must be Laurie's. Do you have memberships?
I do have channel memberships.
Yay!
I
You have a
don't know.
member, Trisha.
Yeah, thank you, Erica. I love Erica.
And
She's a good
Trisha
teammate.
is a new member. You have a new member. Yay! I know. We just still clap.
We can
then-
take a little break from the heavy stuff.
Yeah.
And I have a new member. Thank you, Tommy.
Multi-seal claps.
Yeah.
Tommy Toontown.
Oh, sorry about my dog.
That's okay. Is that Eddie?
That's Eddie.
I love him. What else we have here? Thank you so much to Nancy. And we've got while we're doing members, we'll read some of these. Anna from Canada, member for 3 months. Thank you so much, Anna.
Yay.
Thank you for covering this. Yes, thank you so much, ladies. This has been great. I think it's been needed, and thank you for being willing to do this. And
course.
thank you, Stasia Flonase, Marilyn, you're fantastic, Mama Bear. Thank you.
True.
That's so sweet.
I'm a cub myself, so I can say that.
As am I.
I think I am.
Yes, I think you all are. Thank you. Yeah, I'm old. Let's see.
I have you beat on that one.
No, I don't know about that.
I'm 61.
Oh, you lie.
I am 61.
I just did my
December.
roots this morning. Okay, question for Gretchen. Can you have advice for the vulnerability hangover after sharing your story?
Great question. So this is speaking to, if I'm hearing you right, Circle of Genius, that kind of emotional exhaustion, that emotional kind of your body feels it. I mean, there's that book, The Body Keeps a Score, for a reason. Our bodies do, hold on. There's things like trauma memories and stuff in our body, and when we release some of that, when we talk about it, when we express it, it's very, very emotional. And like you said, vulnerability is a huge thing, and not one to be taken lightly, because that's a huge when you open up about trauma, that's a huge sense of vulnerability. What I would say is this. First, I'd always promote self-care in any way that looks like for you. That's healthy, I'll say, if possible, if it's healthy and okay. But really, self-care, I think sometimes people have an initial regret, like they want to express it, whether it's to a therapist, whether it's to a friend, a partner, and depending on the person's response or not, there can be that feeling of, was that okay? And self-doubt. So just kind of processing through some of those emotions and letting those be what they are. You're going to have some feelings about opening up and being vulnerable to people and sharing that. So knowing that that's going to be part of the process and that will get better over time. But really just trying to give yourself a sense of kindness and compassion and nurturance, especially following talking about and sharing your story. I often I'll pace with people when I'm talking, when the person's talking, sharing their story in therapy with me. And we'll have a way that I'll say, hey, if it's getting to be too much, or I see that it might be getting too much, it's kind of what I'm seeing and what you're feeling. Please let's make sure that we just go to the point where you're comfortable. And then, we can stop and we can switch to something a little bit calmer and lighter and get you centered, so that you don't leave the meeting completely unraveled, right? Which can happen. So remembering that too is you're in control of how much or how little of your story you can share, or that you want to share, I'm sorry. And
Right.
so that could be a component too, is sometimes people feel like they have to share every single thing or whatever. And, that is totally again, going back to the sense of empowerment and choice, that's completely within your control and what you want to share. So understanding that ahead of time as well. And, but yeah, there's going to be some feelings of, gosh, I was holding on to that, and now I shared my story with this person or this, whoever it may be. There can be that, but yeah, self-compassion and self-kindness, especially following sharing your story, is really important.
Yeah, I like the idea of having people at their own pace with people they feel comfortable with and safe with, like a therapist like you. And also, I was looking at some of the comments. Lavender Bridges said, Carrie J, I work in SA advocacy. The witness advocates in the DA's office are so valuable.
Yeah, they
So
can be.
I bet they can be. And I'm wondering, is it what are the criteria usually of a victim's advocate? Do you know that
Like
if they're
qualifications
trained?
to get the job.
Yes, yes.
I mean, it's probably maybe like a background in social work, maybe a degree in social work. You don't have to be a counselor. You don't have to have a master's, because you're not counseling them
Right.
as a victim witness coordinator.
You're guiding them.
What's that?
You're guiding them.
Yeah, you're helping to provide that information. You're being that connection. You're making sure they're in the loop on what's going on with the case. And I don't know if we want to talk about now. I do want to mention the Victims' Rights Acts that might be at play at some point. But so victims have certain rights to information and notice of hearings and things like that. So it's really semi-procedural, but then also, like I mentioned, my friend who ran the sex crimes unit, that victim coordinator sat with every victim anywhere the victim was in the building, whether it was outside the courtroom waiting to be called in. And when she was called in, they'd go sit in the courtroom and be there for the testimony, be that face that the victim could focus on to testify if she needed it.
I've seen that, yeah.
Escorting her back, helping her process. Like, they really were very well trained. Not every DA's office is that way. But in larger jurisdictions, you're going to find well-developed victim witness advocates. But I think just a background in social work is probably all that you really need to do it, if that's what people want to do. And it's a very important job.
Very.
Very much so.
Let's go around to Lori. Why does it seem like so many predators get away with these crimes? So many people get silenced or made out to be evil for trying to expose these messes, or they get targeted. What do you think about that?
Me?
Yeah, that's a hard one.
Yeah, there are so many.
Either one. We can each of you can speak to that if you want.
I mean, just looking at it from the trial standpoint, there are so many points of vulnerability for someone to get away with it. Maybe you have a judge who's very old fashioned, and so he leans defense. Maybe you have one person on the jury who's like, no, I don't believe these women when they say it. That's all they need is one person, and they don't get a conviction. Or maybe you get a judge and a sentencing matrix that is very light. So even if they get convicted, if the offense isn't a felony, they basically get probation and they're out doing whatever. That's where I see some of the points of vulnerability for why justice does not always prevail. Lori, I'm sure, has her own.
Well, from a law enforcement perspective, each state's statutes are very specific as to the elements of the crime that are required to proceed with prosecution. So, and even though they shouldn't be up for interpretation, sometimes they are. Some might deem, we don't have this particular element of the crime, or we don't have that element of the crime, so they won't proceed with the charges. And sometimes it's just not a good case, unfortunately. But I think in the situations with the people where there are multiple victims involved, that gives strength to the activity that's being shown and that we're hoping to be prosecuted.
Now, how does that come together as far as if you have different allegations and reports and even in some cases charges in other states? Is there a sharing of information where that would come up right away, that there are several victims in different states for that one perpetrator?
Yeah, I
Does
think
that
that's what
pop up
Carrie
right
was
away?
talking about earlier with the past bad acts.
Yeah, it would show up on a rap sheet,
Yeah.
So we always ran a criminal history background, including not just Pennsylvania, but nationwide, NCIC, when we go to the probable cause hearing. So if there were charges, even if they weren't resolved, we'd know, oh, there's something in Illinois, oh, there's something in Florida,
Right.
and we could reach out and find out.
Okay, I got a question for Gretchen. I don't mean to do rapid fire, just so many questions. This is great. Gretchen, do people often not report because they're afraid of not being believed?
I think so. There is that component. They also start to for lack of a better word, gaslight themselves and say, well, maybe it wasn't that bad. Or maybe, I don't know if this is something, speaking to Lori's point about like different reportable things, is this something that could be reported? Is this something that's even, I think a lot of people think there's a lot of gray area with sexual harassment, and there's lots of different types of inappropriate sexual behaviors and sexual interactions. And so that's a component. I think of maybe not being believed, or them themselves thinking maybe that there's not worthy of reporting. Right. Another part of it I find, and I was going to speak, it kind of tackles what you were saying, Kimberly, but also the previous comment by Jazzy Girl, is there is a socialization aspect, the environment that we live in, our culture. And, I have worked with a number of men who have been victimized. And unfortunately, that is, it's harder sometimes from a social perspective, from what we're constructed to think about in terms of sexual behaviors and sexual conduct, that men can be victimized, and obviously not just as a child, but as, an early adult, a young adult or beyond, they can be victimized just as much as women. And that's not a discussion that's often had, but I think it needs to be, because men can, I mean, I'm glad in a way that, a lot of people have been talking about Baby Reindeer on Netflix, the series, but it brings to light that there are men that are, that are victimized and stalked and harassed and even inappropriately, like sexual assault type issues. So that's another reason sometimes men don't report, or they think, maybe they're not believed, or they've heard other, people not believed. But yeah, I think there can be a component of that they're not believed, or that they'll be, that'll be dissected too much, like we've talked about. I mean, about, like you were talking about, Carrie, earlier, about inconsistencies in their story. Now, do we remember, sometimes do people remember every single detail of something that's happened to them, especially when it's trauma?
Yeah.
That's another thing. So I think there's lots of layers to that, why people may not, feel like they may not be believed, or they may feel uncomfortable in reporting because, they may not, their story might not be 100% as it should be presented,
Right.
because they did go through a trauma.
And just to tag on that, regardless of whether you're an SA victim or, you were robbed, you were shot, you were beaten up, because that's what I did. I did major crimes primarily. But, a good prosecutor will know how to plan. I did it for 8 years. I had homicide cases that I was in charge of. I was second chair on even more, including the death penalty case, because we do have the death penalty here in Pennsylvania. A good prosecutor learns how to handle these things for the jury. Like, oh, okay, I know that the jury might kind of react to this. So I'm going to plan. So it doesn't all fall on the victim. Okay. Yes, without that testimony, there's no case. That's true. But your prosecutor, if they're doing their job, they're preparing the victim for trial, they're preparing the victim for cross-examination, and they're preparing their case for attack by the defense. So let me anticipate what the defense is going to do. And how's my jury going to react to this issue or that issue? And let me prepare my case and handle it that way. That's what good prosecutors do. So, if people are afraid, if I don't report, or if I do report and I say it wrong, the whole thing's going to fall apart.
Right.
That is not true. It is not the victim's job to carry the trial. It is the prosecutor's job.
Good point.
Right.
I'm glad you're bringing that. Yeah, I'm glad you're highlighting that, Carrie, because that's a very important point.
Yeah, that's fantastic. There are quite a few comments and questions regarding statute of limitations. If I can read a few of those to y'all. We've got Kayla McDonald. Hey, Kayla, so good to see you. I do not think there should be a statute of limitations for any SA crime. It can be a child. Oh, it got unstarted. Sorry. Okay, I have a hard time reading it from the screen, but I'll squint and do it. I do not think there should be a statute of limitations for any SA crime. It can be a child or adult, and it still happened. The victim should not get justice due to a time frame. Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. What do you all think about that? There's one other thing I just wanted to put real quick, tag it on there, is I believe it was Tommy Toontown that said, comment, Canada does not have a statutory time limit on reporting sex crimes. So that's good to know about Canada.
I think the U.S. should go there too.
Yeah, I agree.
We do soon.
Yeah, what do you have you had any experience in that? I mean, all three of you have had contact with victims, I'm sure, that have come forward after something maybe ran out, like the statute of limitations. What do you think about that?
Well, even the Danny Masterson case, those cases were beyond the statute of limitations, but there was some kind of, Carrie, you might know, because of there being the three of them, and prosecuting
Right.
them together, they were able to bypass that somehow. Do you know how that worked, Carrie?
Maybe as a course of conduct. If it's if it's considered a course of conduct crime, the conduct doesn't conclude until the very last offense.
But I agree. No statute of limitations on crimes in that category.
I agree, and I would just reiterate that some people are not ready to go through the process, albeit, as Carrie said, the prosecutor should be, good in preparing, and there should, ideally there should be advocates and helping through the process and all that, but just the emotional bandwidth that the person has at the time, and they may not be ready to come forward until many years later. So
Right.
I would reiterate that point that Keela said.
So knowing what you do know about some of the testimonies of the victims of this situation or this crime that happened with Louis Repetto, where he was going around pretty much victimizing multiple people with pictures that were unsolicited, with even in some cases sexual harassment, things like that. And what do you think that he could be charged with?
Well, I looked up Illinois because I had watched Mandy and Shannon, and I know Shannon's in Chicago. And I don't think there was a specific offense in their crimes code for, basically cyber version of indecent assault or indecent exposure. I think, unless the state that has jurisdiction has a specific offense for that, and I think a lot of states are probably very behind on, cyber sexual offenses.
Cyber flashing, or call it.
They're going to look at the elements as if it had happened in person of an indecent exposure. But that's what I would be thinking of in PA law is indecent exposure, which is, an unwanted or unconsensual display of genitalia for sexual gratification of the perpetrator.
So state by state, you're saying it may not be a crime in some states and it is in others?
Well, I think every state's going to have some version of an indecent exposure crime. I don't think many states have the more sophisticated, defined offense of a cyber flashing, like you said, specific to the use of social media to commit the crime versus to what the traditional in-person trench coat kind of guy crime that we're familiar with.
And I do want to clarify, I'm not sure what state this happened in, allegedly, but there are some allegations of at least one case of in-person SA. So in that case, I'm not sure if that was Illinois or Missouri. Is that where St. Louis is?
Yeah.
It could be either one of those states. So there's even more serious allegations, I believe, than the internet stuff. So, and to speak to Lori's point, when you get these things popping up, oftentimes there's layers to it and there's other crimes attached to it, because this does seem to be a pattern with this person. And I do hope they get help. I don't want them to harm themselves, but this is very serious. And I'm glad that people have been able to come forward and shed some light on it, because that, there's a lot. One victim is too much, but there's many. There's many.
Right. And we want the behavior to stop. So
absolutely. Yep. Lathonda Gocklinga. I'm terrible at saying it. Gocklinga. Thank you so much for the super chat. I read people saying you are blowing it up. It was just a few pictures, not a big crime. That makes it even harder for victims to talk about it.
Yeah. Which is why I think, Marilyn, you doing this is really important, because you have, especially having Gretchen here, talking about the emotional impact of this type of crime on a victim. It's raising the awareness and educating people. Like, no, it actually is a big deal. And here's why. Change doesn't happen overnight. And, the more we talk about it being a serious crime, and the more people like Gretchen explain to us what happens to victims of this crime and similar, the less we'll hear comments, like she.
Right.
So,
and it's often been said that this community as a whole has so many people that have been victimized, not just by cults, but by perpetrators such as we're talking about now, child SA, all kinds of abusive relationships, MLMs, and all kinds of coercive control. So I personally, they call me Mama Bear for a reason. I'm just like, I can't sit by and let this happen without saying something. And I am just blown away at the amount of people coming forward and talking about it, and also the amount of support. So I really I can't thank you ladies enough for coming out and talking about this.
I think absolutely this is a panel of 4 people that are fighters for the rights of victims.
Yeah.
So, I'm here for it. Anything I could do to help, I'm here.
Four of many. There's an army. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Before I forget, I didn't want to forget about the Victims' Rights Act.
Oh, that's right.
Issue.
Yep.
So I just want to throw it out there. Every state, just about every state, is going to have some version of a Victims' Rights Act. Every state's going to define a victim that is covered by that act differently. Some are only felony victims or of a certain type of offense, enumerated offense in the definition of what is a victim in their Rights Act. But if you're a victim and you want to know, you can find your state's Victims' Rights Act and look at the definition yourself. But Victims' Rights Act are there to make sure that police and prosecutors do what they're supposed to do with consulting you, especially about plea offers and especially about being present at any trial or sentencing hearing. And that usually includes a right to be heard. So sometimes DA's offices have to make deals and the victims don't like it. And maybe there's a reason why a deal has to be made. That victim, though, should be have that discussion. Here's
Right.
why we're making this deal. Or if they say, what would you like? What would you feel comfortable with? A lot of states have sentencing matrices. So they combine a prior record score with a score assigned to the offense. They come up with a range of time in jail, months in jail. So here's our standard range. Do you feel satisfied if it were this? Those are important discussions that, especially if you're covered under the Victims' Rights Act and the prosecutor does not have with you, I would have been fired if I had done that, just made it without talking to my victim. And also, if they go ahead with a plea offer anyway and the victim doesn't like it, and you have a right to be present and to give a victim's impact statement at sentencing, you can tell the court, I don't like this deal. I told the DA I don't like this deal. I explained why I felt it undervalued what happened to me. The judge might even reject the plea deal and say, why would I take this plea deal when the victim doesn't like it? Go back to the drawing board.
Right.
So I just wanted to put that out there because it's really important. I didn't want to forget. So
Absolutely. No, I'm glad you did.
Just a quick follow-up, Carrie, to that. Because, in mental health, there's, as was mentioned, I think, by a previous comment, there's a silencing that goes on of victims, whether it's the perpetrator themselves tells them to be quiet about it, they self-silence, they're told, or they're somehow suppressed in some way in terms of speaking up. Are part of those plea deals like non-disclosure agreement, like NDAs, or
NDAs?
like in terms of there's not any like specifications in some of those that they can't speak about anything?
I have never heard of that.
Okay, I didn't know if that was.
I have never heard of that.
I think that usually comes up if there's a civil suit involved.
Yeah.
So if there's a settlement in a civil suit, oftentimes they'll have to sign an NDA. But understand too that is another option for victims. If they don't feel satisfied with the legal outcome, they may seek some sort of restitution in a civil suit.
Right. Good point.
So yeah, that's where the NDAs come in. Yeah.
Got it.
Good point. Just some comments from the chat. Glad this conversation is happening, giving a voice to those who may not have felt that they had a voice.
Good.
Yeah. And I had popped this up earlier, but thank you so much for the super chat, Anna from Canada. 1,000 hugs to anyone who experienced this. I have not, but I know many women who have. Yeah, I don't know the statistics or the percentage, but I thinking of my friends and some of my family members over the years, and it's very high percentage than I myself. So yeah, I'm glad that we can talk about it and support each other. And I thought this was a really good comment as well, because we are in this anti-ex Scientology space, and I did a stream with Kelly Copter was it last week, on this very point. Comment: at the end of the day, Scientology is at the heart of this trauma, in this particular thing. Scientology provides the perfect matrix for abuse of all types.
Yep, absolutely.
And I don't know if you all saw that presentation that Kelly gave, but it was very eye-opening. She went from the doctrines of L. Ron Hubbard and spoke to that, and also through the years, all the different ways that they groom people and also perpetrators, and they in some ways produce a lot of predators. So, and cults do that over and over. I've seen it in my former cult as well. So yeah. What else do we have? I had some questions. Whoever wants to take this up, Ian Casillas, hey there. I always hear, well, there are false reports of grape. We're talking about the R word. Usually from males. I want to know, as a prosecutor, law enforcement, and therapist, have you seen it in our cases? Not sure.
You mean your cases, like mine or Lori's?
Oh, your cases. Yeah, I mean that.
But in our cases, it sounds like she's asking about the victims who have come forward from the person that we're talking about. But I don't know.
Right. I think it may be. Anne, are you talking about? I think she's talking about your cases, because in the Liz Repetto case, it was mostly women. So I think maybe she's talking about in general in the cases that you've seen. Let's go with that.
Yeah, we absolutely. It's very common, but you still have to take the report and take the statement as if they're 100% telling the truth. And if the evidence suggests a different story, then that's something that has to be investigated. Because first off, somebody else asked it earlier about victims being re-victimized. If they're telling the truth, that's something that we don't want to happen. We want to be as sensitive to them and their needs as we can be. But sometimes the evidence doesn't back up what they're saying. And it's just it's a very sensitive walk you have to take to get to the bottom of what that situation is, unfortunately. And a lot of times people will make a claim like that because they're mad. I mean, in my career, when I saw it the most, honestly, was from prostitutes who didn't get paid or felt like they didn't get paid enough. Then they said that the R word came up. Mm-hmm. But they are as easily victimized as anybody else. Mm-hmm. So, and they have the right to not be. They have the right to say, I'm going to proceed with this person, but I'm saying no to that person. They have that right. Mm-hmm. But you just have to carefully investigate every case, gather what evidence you can gather, and follow the path that's put in front of you.
Yeah, I would agree. I had one in my 8 years, because I remember I wasn't a sex crimes prosecutor, but I did some. I only had one case, but what Lori said about gathering evidence, that's called corroboration. So, you have a victim who's giving their testimony, but then, sometimes corroborating evidence is the physical, there's an exam done, or sometimes the corroborating evidence is a video or an audio clip that caught something that backs up what the victim's saying. And then sometimes you don't have any of that. And, that makes it tough, because if you're like spidey senses are going off, like things aren't adding up here. I don't feel like I'm being told the truth, but I can't pinpoint it. That can be a very hard place for a prosecutor to be at, because whatever TV and movies say, like nobody wants to put away an innocent person,
Right.
Right.
because then that means a dangerous person is out there. So, but we're human. We do the best we can. But I only saw it ever on one occasion.
Right. And how do you balance that with, with this exactly? Victims are
Mhm.
judged. There's no two ways about it. And I think we saw that with even the Danny Masterson trial,
Mhm.
how victims are, in often cases, what I don't know what you call it, like made to feel like they're not credible,
Mm.
or that like, the whole adage of like, where, like, whoa, what were you wearing? Or what, where did you ask for it and all that? And I think that, yeah, that's another thing that I think victims really have to deal with as well.
Yeah.
And I was just going to add
I'm
on.
sorry, Gretchen.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to add on to that, Marilyn. In my work, though I don't necessarily see, I would say, any kind of false reports that I've been aware of. I do understand that a lot of people will scapegoat mental illness as a way of not believing them. Oh, well, they're
Mhm.
bipolar, or they
Yeah.
have borderline personality disorder, or they have this or that. And so it's almost like a way to just dismiss their statements and their experience. And that's disheartening too, because they're not mutually, like, they're not mutually exclusive. You can be a victim of SA or grape and still, and have a mental health condition. It's not, and that's maddening for me as a therapist, because it's
Right.
like, no, and that's where I think a lot of maybe people are misinformed. It has nothing to do with it. Now, there are people that I've seen that have severe psychosis, but that's more of a pattern of delusion. If it's severe enough, delusions, delusional processes, and things like that. And so there's more to the story than there's a lot of other things that are going on for them.
Right.
But by and large, I don't like when mental illness is used as kind of a way to not believe someone, to say, well, they have this or that, so they're, it's not legitimate what they're saying.
There was an R trial where, and this would have been in the last 15 years, where the defense attorney, who was kind of lazy, actually argued in his closing argument that the R couldn't happen because everyone knows you can't have sex on a couch. Like, he made that argument
Who said that?
Well, I'm not going to put him on blast, because
I mean,
I feel like that says more about him than maybe his client. I'm like,
okay. And what about a
Wow.
backseat of a car then?
Wow.
He said that to a jury with a straight face. Like, I mean, so yeah, being a defense attorney and defending an R person is hard. You got to do something, you got to come up with something. But yeah, there's a lot of ridiculous arguments and tactics being used by lazy defense attorneys. But yeah, I think, Gretchen, on the heels of what you're saying, we've become more aware as a society about mental health and mental illness and the importance of addressing mental health. And I'm hoping that trickles down into our jury pools. But that's where other bad evidence comes into play, because regular average Joes who get picked for a jury, we don't want to believe Bill Cosby spiked those drinks,
Right.
Based on the word of one person. We don't want to think that about someone that we held up. And apparently that jury out there needed to hear from more than one person to get over that, oh, but it's Bill Cosby, that innate desire to want to see the best in people that most people live their life with. So
yeah,
hopefully we're getting there.
Yeah. So I had just a few more comments, if you don't mind. I'll put, and then we can do some closing statements, if you don't mind. We got Joel McCoyne. Hi there, friend. I grew up in the 50s and 60s. It was taboo and looked down upon therapy that was wrong. I've learned that seeking help is a sign of strength, not weakness. Thank goodness for these women. Thank you.
Yep.
So yes, I thought that was great to say that it's a sign of strength
Yes.
and not weakness to seek help
Absolutely.
and to be empowered. Yeah. And thank you so much. Simply Set. Somebody has a clock, right? I love it. So it's almost 3:00 here. Simply Set, Marilyn, in panel. Thank you for a safe place where we feel safe to talk and share, even in chat. Thank you.
Good.
There's more healing happening here just beyond the current. So yeah, I've been in the Starred for most of an hour. So I love the idea of people feeling safe to share in the chat and beyond. So
Absolutely.
and so if there's anything else that you'd like to share in closing, I would love to do this again. I think this was wonderful. I really enjoyed talking to you all.
I would love to.
Yeah, anytime. Thank you for organizing this,
Okay,
Marilyn.
no
It
problem.
was great.
I would just, any of the victims that we are alluding to here without giving specifics, I would like you to specifically know from us that we believe you.
Yes.
You did nothing wrong. It's not your fault. You were a victim and you can move past this.
Amen.
Whether you report or not, if therapy is a great tool, if you don't feel like doing that, find a trusted friend that you could have a discussion with. Just don't hold it in. Just don't let it stay inside you and fester. It's not your fault. And we're here for you. You can reach out to any of us and we'll have a conversation with you.
Absolutely.
I second that.
Yes.
Yep.
And if you three ladies don't mind, maybe in the description of this video, if you don't mind me putting your emails in the
Absolutely.
description, that way, if anyone wants to reach out to all three or either any of you, I think that would be great. And
And I just
Carrie
wanted-
and anyone in closing, Gretchen?
Well, I was just going to say, if I don't know if this is appropriate, but Keela and I are starting a mental health matters space for people to be able to share and hold space for people that need to process some things, whether it's things that are triggering and going on the SBTV community or otherwise. And our hope is to have some speakers, some interviews done earlier in the week, potentially on a topic. And then we're going to follow up with like a peer support hour.
I love that.
That's
on
a
like-
great idea.
We're trying to finalize the details this week. And so it's probably going to start up next week. So I just wanted to let people know that there's a space there if they need it. It's not a replacement for therapy, or it's not, I'm going to be there helping facilitate, but I'm not going to be in a role as like necessarily a psychologist, but just there to help and facilitate.
And here it is. Thank you so much, George. Oh, George, my mod, one of them. Link for Gretchen's channel is Mental Health Matters to us. I love that. Awesome. Thank you so much, ladies. And Carrie J, our lawyer friend.
I'll be everyone's lawyer friend.
Yes, we've got Zach and Carrie J now.
Yay.
Y'all don't know how hard I had to work to get Carrie to come on camera with me. And now look
Yeah.
at her.
I've been a little camera
I'll be on
shy.
camera. Sure, I'll be
Yeah,
on
now we're
Usually-
streaming.
Do my makeup and my hair lives in a bun normally. So
You're beautiful.
So look where you've
Okay.
come now. Now you have your own
I
channel.
know, and
too,
here
right?
I am on the internet.
And you're streaming to your channel. And next time we'll stream to Gretchen's as well. Gretchen's
Yeah.
and Keela. Maybe we can have Keela on as well. That would be
There you go.
awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, ladies. Thank you so much. And to
you.
everyone in
Thank
the
you,
chat,
Marilyn.
keep in touch and we will see you soon. Thank you. Bye. Zenu, Marlene, everybody partake. Cheers. This is good coffee. This is why, my hubby makes the coffee.